So for those of you watching, the meeting is being recorded and it is also being live streamed to YouTube. So welcome to everyone who is watching on YouTube. For those of you watching, the meeting is both live and those who are watching the recording afterwards. We're very excited to have you all watching and to share our presentation. So for the last time, I'll just go over our format for anyone who needs a reminder, and then we'll get started. So we are currently in a webinar. So if you are on Zoom, you cannot share your video or sound at this point, but you're welcome to use the chat in Zoom to say hello to one another and to ask any questions or share any comments. If you are watching live on YouTube, you're also welcome to use the YouTube chat to share, and I will be monitoring that and sharing those with the larger group. And then we will have that check-in portion after our presentation is done, where you'll be able to share your video and sound if you would like to be able to interact. So I think that concludes the announcements, so I'll turn it over to Allison.
All right, it is lovely to see you all here virtually tonight. I know this was supposed to be an in-person meeting, and I truly appreciate your flexibility in our ever-changing schedule. Doesn't this seem like the longest and sometimes the slowest and fastest roller coaster we've ever been on? It sure does to me. It changes all the time, but I am glad we could be here all tonight. And despite our ever-moving schedule, we did have a great 2021 and have great plans for 2022. In 2021, we had a lot of virtual volunteer gatherings and even an in-person gathering for the volunteer awards. It was great to see people in person, and the goal is to do that in 22, a mix of virtual and in-person events, and same with programming. Also in 2021, we moved the Looking Back to Advance Forward project forward. With the approval of the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy funds, we were able to sign the construction contract with Griffith Company, and we start construction in the first quarter of 2022. So that is very exciting. We also in 21 hired a new curator, Carlos Ortega, and we will have our first exhibit on the upper level of the newly renovated visitor center. Roots in Long Beach, Concepts of Home will open in late March. So thank you to all for supporting the renovation of the upper level of the visitor center. We have a new museum shop where Laura was, but Laura can be very easily reached, just a phone call or a text away on the lower level. So we're excited about that and all the changes we have at the Rancho. Also, just want to point out that in 2021, we exceeded our fundraising goals and our expenses came in lower than our revenue. So that is very good. This is great news and a fine way to end our second COVID year. I must say that for 20 and 21, we hit our budget goals. So that's pretty impressive given everything that's happened in the world. And we also start 22 with a positive financial status, and that bodes well for our new year. For 22, we have a lot coming up, is Looking Back to Advance Forward. As I said, we'll be under construction, and we will also be looking at developing STEAM education in the second half of the year, focusing on climate change, environmental justice, and of course, our most precious resource, water. In addition, with the new Roots in California Concept of Home exhibit, there will be a new educational program that will complement the exhibit, the Long Ago Long Beach Artful Storytelling Program for Children. So these are great programs that build on the programs we already have. And also, we also plan, as I mentioned earlier, on having virtual and in-person events. We will start 22 with these projects, and there will be more added as we move into 22. And again, thank you all for being so supportive of the Rancho, its programs, and the public that comes to the site. As I said before, and will continue to say, if it weren't for our volunteers, we couldn't do most of what we do. So thank you for your committed help. Thank you for going with all the changes that have happened over the past couple of years. Please know that with your help and our board and our staff, 2021 was an amazing year, and 22 bodes, with again an ever-changing schedule, a very fantastic year. And thank you, Larry Rich, for being flexible with this program from going from in-person to virtual. And we look forward to hearing more. So Megan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Allison, so much for that overview of what's happened and what's coming. Exciting stuff at the Rancho, and tonight for our volunteers, it is my very good fortune to be able to introduce our featured presenter, Larry Rich. Larry is the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Long Beach. He first came to the city as a student. He went to Cal State Long Beach, where he earned a degree in geography with an emphasis in urban and regional studies. He started his career with the city in 1991 and has been with the Economic Development, Long Range Planning, and since 2008, the Office of Sustainability. So a wide variety of background there. He has a very special interest in the intersection of local geography and local history, in particular where the rivers, creeks, and wetlands used to be. As part of his sustainability work, Larry explores whether at least some of these former natural systems can be revived, restored, and so forth. That provides benefits, as we all know, for a more sustainable city going into the future, kind of looking back to advance forward, if you will. Larry Rich, without further ado, speaking to us tonight on the historic waterways of Long Beach and a little bit further beyond. If you have questions for him, you can type them into the chat and he'll either field them at the end of the presentation, or if they relate directly to what he's talking about, may choose to interrupt the presentation for that. Larry, thank you so much for being here. We're all honored.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm happy to be here and share this presentation. I think I'm allowing for about 30 minutes starting now, is that right? Plus questions. So I've given a version of this presentation for, I don't know, maybe 13 years now. Normally it's called the Spatial History of Long Beach, and it can take up to 2 hours. So I'm going to be cramming a lot of information into the next 30 minutes, but it's the good basic stuff. I'm going to focus in on the sort of historic geography of Long Beach and where our rivers and creeks and wetlands and springs used to be and maybe still are. We'll kind of explore that. And I'm going to be doing this rather than, or not so much with a PowerPoint, but a live demonstration of a specialty software called Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. And so it used to be a very specialty thing. However, nowadays with Google Maps and Google Earth, a lot of the stuff that I'm about to do is accessible to anybody, and people are a lot more familiar with aerial photography and stuff like that than they ever were before. So I'm going to jump to sharing my screen to the GIS program, and I'm going to also, well, I'll leave my camera on, or maybe I won't. Here, I'm going to turn off my video so I can concentrate on this map. So is everyone, and I can take a nod for the folks that I see on the right, seeing this aerial photograph? Okay, so this is a screen from the GIS program, and it's showing aerial photography of Long Beach, and that white dashed line is the city boundary to help orient yourself. And you know, you can see the ocean peeking in down on the southern edge of the map. On the left is a long list of checkboxes and names. These are the different layers in GIS. So right now, well, I mean, the main ones we're looking at are the city boundary and a 2010 aerial, right? Over the course of this presentation, I'm going to be turning on and off a bunch of these different things, and you'll see how powerful and how perhaps quickly overwhelming all this data can be. That I'm going to try to walk us through it in a very gradual and gentle way. You know, when you're looking at the city through an aerial photograph like this, there's, you know, most of what you're seeing on a, you know, very small scale are buildings and streets, which sort of wash out into a pixelated haze, right? So it's really hard to see streets at this scale, but the easiest thing to orientate yourself with are the large open spaces. So if you're, you know, broadly familiar with Long Beach, as I know many of you are, the largest open space in the city is El Dorado Park over here, and you can see the lakes in the regional park. And then, you know, other large open spaces are Recreation Park with Colorado Lagoon down over here. The airport stands out quite a bit. So the way you'd find the Rancho, right, Rancho Los Cerritos, is the Virginia Country Club golf course, which surrounds the Rancho. And you will note it is the largest green space in the western half of the city. There's no park that large that shows up, just this private golf course. So consider that perhaps in our considerations about environmental justice this year. The thing that I'm about to do is, well, and I have it already, this is a means to kind of go back in time. And so we're about to enter a time machine and go from this image of 2010 back to an image from 1896. And this 1896 image is a United States Geological Survey map that surveyors from the federal government came out in the 1890s, and they surveyed with, you know, scientific survey methods the entirety of Southern California. And so this is the best, oldest map that is so accurate it can be geo-referenced to, you know, the modern street grid and modern geographic layers. And so I'm going to peel back the urban crust of Long Beach in 2010 to reveal the landscape of the Long Beach area in 1896. And as I do this very slowly, I'm going to call out some features that will become apparent at that transition point. So we can see this map creeping up. You know, this handsome sort of beige color with lots of squiggly blue lines. On the left edge, it's a little bit cut off, but there's a feature called the Watson Lakes and the Watson Crossing that are, and I'm about to cross the boundary of the city, right? So those are outside of Long Beach. But then right where I've just crossed over, you can begin to see that blue squiggly line. That's the, in 1896, the Los Angeles River, which makes up or corresponds fairly well with the western bound, or some portion of the western boundary of the city. And then we're, you know, in West Long Beach, this grid of streets that you're seeing, and all the little black specks there are individual farmhouses or outbuildings in West Long Beach, which was very much a farming community in 1896. And so I'm about to pass over the channelized LA River that you can kind of make out, right, in the aerial photograph. But as I pass over it, you'll see that there is no river underneath that in 1896, because the river is actually over here at that western boundary of the city. And then there's another squiggly line that's coming down, and this is a secondary channel of the LA River that was referred to as the Cerritos Slough. And the Cerritos Slough may have been a former channel of the LA River that got kind of left behind as the river changed course and went to this western channel, but it was sort of a secondary backwater channel. So now we're revealing what in 1896 was all of the city of Long Beach, which of course now is just the downtown, but you can see that street grid system and the density of buildings, you know, kind of concentrating the shoreline with the San Pedro Bay label hugging right there at the shore, and two, not one, but two piers sticking out into the bay, the Pine Avenue Pier, and then the other short-lived Magnolia Avenue Pier that existed back then in 1896. And then as I continue to pan over, you see that you know, the north-south street grid gives way to that diagonal line, which is Alamedas Avenue, which is of course the boundary between the two ranchos. So west of that is the Rancho Los Cerritos, and now east of that is the Rancho Los Alamitos. And it makes a little bend here, and angles a little bit more sharply over the top of Signal Hill, which here is labeled as Los Cerritos, and I can explain that in a second. And so this dashed line continues that rancho boundary. All the brown squiggly lines are elevation contours. So they're not actual features on the surface of the land, but the elevation. And so we can see right here, just to the left of my cursor, it says 100 feet. So that thick line that kind of goes around what's Reservoir Hill is the 100 foot above sea level contour. And so then we continue. And so all over the place here, we're seeing squiggly rivers, squiggly creeks. Down here, this is the LA River Estuary, which is now the Port of Long Beach. So that's a coastal estuary salt marsh that was transformed into the port starting in 1911. But more squiggly lines, and then we're about to see another, well, labeled Alamitos Bay, another coastal estuary, right? And the San Gabriel River coming in right at the LA County, Orange County boundary. So in 1896, Long Beach was very much in existence, although it was sort of considered a village with, you know, less than 5,000 people living in it. And lots of open space everywhere with lots of waterways going all over the place, doing their thing in a very natural way, you know, with meandering, squiggling, splitting apart, joining back together, just water flowing out over the Los Angeles plain. And then here's the very beginnings of the city of Los Alamitos over here into Orange County. And so notice the single largest text labeling on this map are the names of the ranchos, because they were in large part still very much intact, or you know, under single ownership, as they were in 1896, you know, two branches of the Bixby family. You know, Jotham Bixby was very much in charge of the Rancho Los Cerritos at that time. And well, I'm drawing a blank on his Bixby cousin that died in 1888, but some inheritor of the other branch of the Bixbys was in charge of the rancho at Rancho Los Alamitos. So what I'm going to do is turn off this that modern aerial and really call out some of these features on this old map, because if you've never seen this before and are not used to looking at topographic maps, which is what this is, meaning it's showing elevations and natural features, it may be helpful to do a quick overview of what you're seeing. So starting with the old bay, so San Pedro Bay down here, you know, that's this perfect crescent shape shoreline that is much altered today. The old rivers coming in, so that's the Los Angeles River on the west and the San Gabriel River on the east, and then the estuaries and coastal wetlands that are at the mouths of each one of those rivers, vast thousands and thousands of acres that in 1896 was largely considered worthless because you couldn't ranch, you couldn't farm there, although they were starting to figure out what you could do there, which was develop harbors through a process of dredge and fill. There's also, I mentioned the Cerritos Slough, which is this secondary branch or stream of the LA River. And a slough is a term that's not often used in modern Southern California or just in the West Coast in general, but it's very present along the, say, Mississippi River, where it's basically a backwater channel or something like that. And then there are also creeks. So this long squiggly guy is Bouton Creek or Bouton Creek that is going across Rancho Los Alamitos and now East Long Beach, right? But up here, there's also one that we came to learn, you know, they're not labeled on this map, but this is Jackson Creek coming in right near where the rancho is. And then a lesser creek coming in here that I may have time to mention. It's interesting that this one is so short, and I'll explain why that is. And so And then there's lots of little water bodies showing on this map all over the place, from the Bouton Lake, which is the big one, to all these other smaller ones all over the place. And some of them have hatching on them, which means that they're seasonal or intermittent water bodies, although Bouton Lake is showing as a year-round water body. And then the squiggly lines along here, which I mentioned, are measures of elevation. They capture the shape of Signal Hill, but not just of Signal Hill, of the entire Signal Hill uplift. And what's called an uplift because it's created by the Newport-Inglewood Fault. So this brown diagonal line is the Newport-Inglewood Fault zone, and the action of that fault is what created the Signal Hill uplift and the central dome of Signal Hill. So that's kind of the overview of what you're seeing on this map. Now, I'm going to spend the balance of the time kind of zooming in to some features here, and I will start by zooming in to the vicinity of the Rancho. So grabbing in like this. So the Rancho isn't the Rancho buildings, of course, the Rancho is two things. It's the entirety of the 27,000 acres. And so the big label that sort of banner label that goes across is spread out to try to capture the extent of the large 27,000 acre property. But, nowadays we associate the Rancho with the, I forget your acreage there, but let's say 7-acre campus that you have, which is much smaller. And so the Rancho buildings aren't labeled on this map, but this is, well, there's two of them. These little specks right here at this kind of nexus of roads are the actual Rancho buildings. And so they are right next to the river. The LA River came down and passed right by the base of the high ground that the Rancho was built on, and snuggled right up against the bluff there. And so there's two names associated with the Rancho that are labeled on this map because of the two railroads that were prominent transportation corridors at this time, because of course 1896, no automobiles. You got around by horse and wagon or on the railroads. So west of the Rancho, due west, is a connector road that connects to the Southern Pacific Railroad, which is here crossing Compton Creek, the squiggly creek coming down. And so this is called the Cerritos Station. So you could stop here and get to the Rancho. Looks like it passes over a little waterway or slough here. And then on the other side, there's another railroad called the LA Terminal Railroad that has its own Bixby station. And again, there's a road crossing over. This little speck is George Bixby's house that was built in about 1890. So it's showing up, and it's like this road to the railroad is his driveway. So, and I'll zoom in a bit more. So, the Rancho buildings were constructed at the tip of the hill, on the high ground of the bluff, at one end of the Signal Hill uplift, at the junction of these two waterways. So the LA River and Jackson Creek. And along Jackson Creek, you see these symbol means freshwater wetlands. So it was very marshy along Jackson Creek. As you are all well aware, the Rancho was built in a place where there was once a Native American village. And so the Native Americans were actually the ones that picked the sweet spot at the junction of two waterways with access to water and wood and forage, but also made a point to build on the high ground because of their long habitation time in this area. They knew that the low-lying ground would flood, so they were up off the floodplain. And so when the Spanish soldiers were going out to look for good Rancho sites for their retirements, they generally chose the locations of Native American villages. And so, you may know that aspect, but may not have seen how there's this sweet spot nexus of these different waterways. And the same thing is true of the Rancho Los Alamitos on the other side. So those three specks are the Rancho buildings. And here's Bouton Creek coming down and joining the San Gabriel River, and branches of the wetland coming right up to the point of that hill, but they're up on the top of the hill. And, of course, that village site is known as Pabungna, and yours, I believe, is referred to as Tevaenga. The interesting thing that I want to mention here is that in the earliest days when the rancho was originally granted to Manuel Nieto, the boundaries of the rancho, this was the pre-Los Cerritos and Los Alamitos ranchos, but the larger Nieto rancho extended from the Santa Ana River to the San Gabriel River. But and then later they were divided into the 5 smaller ranchos, including Los Cerritos and Los Alamitos. But in 1896, this is the Los Angeles River, and this is clearly part of the Nieto Rancho grant. And so the San Gabriel River in 1896 was over here. But in 1784, the San Gabriel River was over here. And so that's how that discrepancy is explained, is the San Gabriel River was actually in a different place over here. And it was in a massive flood event over the winter of 1867 and 1868 that the San Gabriel River changed course and jumped into Pio Pico's irrigation ditch up near Whittier Narrows and went due south and broke into Alamitos Bay. And at that time, they were calling that the New River. And by 1896, they had gotten used to the idea that the New River was going to be the permanent new channel for the San Gabriel River. And so the actual labeling of the San Gabriel is a little bit off this map, but here's the extension of it, where this is now officially the San Gabriel River. But for a while, they were calling this the New River, and this one the Old River. And so prior to 1867, the Los Angeles River was a tributary to the San Gabriel River. And that modern, there's modern evidence of that, because some of you may be familiar with the Rio Hondo channel that comes from the Whittier Narrows and crosses over and joins the Los Angeles River in Southgate. The Rio Hondo is the old San Gabriel River channel when it came down on this western side of Long Beach. So the rivers are the things that formed the entirety of the Los Angeles Basin. They carried water out of the mountains, but along with that water, they carried the material, the rocks and sand and eroded material out of the San Gabriels. So as the San Gabriels were uplifting, starting 6 million years ago, they're not that old. The San Gabriel Mountains are only about 6 million years old. Consider that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. So the San Gabriel Mountains are much younger than the dinosaurs. But as they uplifted, the storms came in off the ocean and rained on them and eroded them down. And so when they began to uplift, there was no Los Angeles Basin. There was just the mountains and the ocean. And so as they uplifted and eroded, the material that eroded out of them started to build land, at the base of the mountains, and the rivers carried that material further and further out into the channel, right? I say the channel because it's between, say, Catalina and the mountains. And so that ocean channel was 10,000 feet deep, and the sand and rock that washed out of those mountains filled up this ocean channel 10,000 feet to break the surface. And it's more complicated than that because sea level was going up and down during the ice ages as well. So, at times in the past, the sea level was much lower, so the land went out much farther, and then sea level rose again and re-inundated the land, and that process went on several times. But the rivers, the Los Angeles, the San Gabriel, and the Santa Ana, each come out of their mountains, and they are the primary carriers of all this sand and silt, and built the entire LA basin. So that was happening all along, the rivers, and they were changing course all over the place, all over the LA basin. So basically these rivers were at one time or another everywhere in the LA basin, meandering around, changing course, depositing sand. And it's only when, we show up, Europeans, in the late 18th century, that we find the situation that's much as it is now, where the coastline is and so on. And so actually I have a visual aid. Let's see how it's going to work for me to do a new share for, or are you, well, hold on. Are you seeing my watercolor? So this is, oblique visualization of those rivers. And so here's that San Gabriel River coming across and joining on the western side of Long Beach. And this was a painting that was done by the Aquarium of the Pacific. So it's 6:06. I might have hit our half hour already. That, and as you might note, we're just getting started or scratching the surface on this. So I'm going to stop now and allow time for questions so that we can address any curiosities you have about what you're seeing or things that you've heard and how they might fit in with these maps. And let me figure out how to get back to my map. Because yeah, one thing that was brought up, and I'm going to start to turn these layers off. And actually, I am going to show you one more thing. That whole discussion about the way that the land was formed by the rivers flowing out of the mountains and carrying all of that material, that was an introduction to how all this water got under the ground, right? So in 1896, there was an important thing happening and an important water feature in the vicinity of the Rancho that I want to call out, called Bouton Well, and it's right here. And Bouton Well was an artesian well that was drilled just 3 years before, and it was a gusher of water that made a plume 80 feet tall and filled in Bouton Lake. And it did all of that because there was so much water trapped under the surface that under a sort of a clay layer where it couldn't come up to the surface until a well punched through it. And then once that well punched through it, it could come to the surface, and it was under so much pressure from where it started, or where the water went into the ground at the base of the mountains, that it forces the water out at this lower elevation. And so Jotham Bixby got into well drilling in the 1870s because the 1867 flood was preceded by a huge drought that bankrupted John Temple and starved all of his cattle. And of course, the Bixbys brought in sheep and had a different business model, but they were, and ironically went through a massive flood soon after they were on the property in 1867. But they were aware that there could be another drought, and that they were willing to start to experiment with drilling wells. So Jotham Bixby was credited with bringing in 10 artesian wells in the vicinity of the Rancho. And I want to introduce this other map that I didn't show in my demonstration the other day, although I would have eventually. And this kind of, I don't know, hopefully we'll tie some things together with the looking backward to move forward project, right? And I just have to navigate my big stack of layers that I get lost in. What am I looking for? This one. No, not that one. Sorry. So in 1904, they came back around and they did a survey of wells and groundwater. And so I mentioned that Jotham Bixby did 10 wells of his own, and Bouton Well was this very notable one. Well, here is a different map that shows the wells that were in place in 1904. And so, here's the Rancho, and every one of these dots with a number is a well. And this gray area is the artesian zone. And so If you drilled a well in the artesian zone, you wouldn't have to pump water out of your hole in the ground. The water would gush out of the ground. And so in 1904 was this peak of artesian water because you can see these clusters of wells in Long Beach, but as I pan a little up and to the right, you're going to see this crazy explosion of wells. And there's a town site that was established on the Rancho Los Cerritos property in addition to Long Beach that's now known as Paramount, but its original name, some of you will know this, is Clearwater. And look at the concentration of artesian wells in Clearwater. And then over here, also in Artesia. So this created this huge agricultural boom where they just had plentiful irrigation water. And this artesian period kind of transitioned the Los Cerritos Ranch from sheep herding to agriculture because of the availability of all this water. So those are some additional little tie-ins related to the rancho and water. So all of this artesian water existed because of all of the water washing out of the mountains, going into those layers so that there was plentiful groundwater. All of this groundwater has since been, well, not all of it, but much of it, the artesian wells have been depleted because what built up for millions of years was depleted in the space of 30 or 40 years. And so now we have this carefully managed, groundwater system where water still is put in and taken out in the wells in Long Beach, but it's not enough to supply, the entirety of our 10 million people in Los Angeles County. So we're part of the aqueduct systems. But the other thing that interferes with all of this is all of our urbanization, right? All of this hardscape, buildings and streets and sidewalks and parking lots are preventing water from soaking into the ground the way that it did originally. And so, what your upcoming project at the Rancho is going to demonstrate is how it's still possible, even in our urbanized city, to look for places to capture and hold in a cistern or capture and infiltrate water back into the ground. And there are tons of shallow aquifers that could be recharged with the conscious reuse and infiltration and pumping back out of stormwater that falls on the city, because rain that falls in the mountains makes it into the recharge areas, but rain that falls on the city turns into polluted stormwater and ruins our shoreline. So again, with introducing those couple of concepts, I will stop there, and now having gone over time, and hear if anyone has questions or comments.
So Larry, the first question from one of our volunteers says she heard about the cold water from an earthquake. Can you describe that?
Cold water from an earthquake? So hold on. I could have had the chat open this whole time. Well, I'm not sure. Hold on. I'm looking. Oh, okay. Well, let me take some of these in order. Oh, well, someone answered. So where's Bouton Well today? So Bouton Lake lives on in the Lakewood Golf Course, as the answer put in, but the Bouton Well itself is long abandoned, and it's in somebody's suburban backyard in Lakewood. And then I heard about the cold water from an earthquake. Can you describe? Okay, I see that. I'm not sure what is meant by that reference. I know when we were talking about the lagoon by the Rancho, there was an oral history that mentioned that the water was cold and that the lagoon opened up from an earthquake. Maybe that's a reference, but that's not something I'm not familiar with, or something that I am not familiar with.
Yeah, and oral histories are the subject of the next question, although she's just thanking you for making visible what she's reading about in the oral histories, but she's a GIS student and would like to know about the layers of the presentation. Sure. So,
at the City of Long Beach, there is a very robust GIS system that's used by various city departments, and the data that it tracks are things like, pipelines and streetlights and just any kind of infrastructure of the city, parcels, parks. The city uses them to make maps, but it also uses it to track its infrastructure and track improvements. A lot of the layers that I have in this presentation are custom layers that aren't part of the city's GIS because they are scanned images of old maps. So for example, here's one of 1903 property owners. So you can see how this is after all these layers draw, from 1903, when things hadn't been broken down as much into single, family home lots, there were still 20-acre farm lots. And in 1903, there was beginning to be a transition. So, and the USGS maps that I shared, were geo-referenced so that they would display against the city's layers. So yeah, there's a whole world in there, and most of these historic maps are now available. The one that I have in this presentation, I found in a flat file in the main library in 1992, which was, at that time, sort of prior to the internet, was the only place where you could find old maps like that, or in the archives of, say, the Rancho or special collections at a library. Nowadays, every one of the USGS maps is available online by going to the US Geological Survey website. And so there's just a wealth of maps like this that you can access. And okay, so I don't see other questions. The other thing that I was gonna make a point to bring up real quick, as I turn some of these things back off, is you have your project at the Rancho to kind of capture your on-site runoff. But in terms of my work at the City of Long Beach, I have a site which is called Willow Springs Park, which is this area here, north of the cemeteries, right? Where the municipal cemetery where William Wilmore is buried, in Sunnyside Cemetery. There's this super block bounded by California, Spring, Orange, and Willow. And so it's learning that there was a historic spring and a willow forest there made me realize at one point that that's what Spring Street and Willow Street are named after, are the features that were prominent on this property in 1882 at the time the American colony was created out of the Rancho Los Cerritos. In the 1920s, it became an oil field and became just a gritty, obscure backlot in the city. But in rediscovering this sort of water history and topography that's there, because in the old topo maps, you can see this Blue Line Creek flowing through, and what it's not showing is the artesian spring that had been here. This is where the city's original water supply was drawn from. And so we're in the process of restoring this back to a riparian wetland. And this is a good time of year to visit if you've never been there, because captured stormwater is actually flowing through the site. And it's possible to use these maps, do GIS analysis, and figure out other places in the city to kind of recapture the old landscape in places where it makes the most sense, where there were water features before, because where wetlands and springs and things like this existed in the past are the best places to reintroduce that, because the landscape was that way for hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and only in the last 100 years has it been altered by humans. But the topography is such that, and the subsurface geology is conducive to these sorts of things. And so to the degree that we want to create new open space and at the same time reintroduce biodiversity and native land, or natural landscapes to the city, using this analysis process is a way to do it. So yes, the Colorado Lagoon, let me pan down there. And you may have to grab the microphone out of my hands if you need to get on with the business of your meeting. But down in Alamitos Bay, this vast bay that has been severely altered, although there are some remnant things going on. And so, here it is, unaltered in 1896, but then here it is with the bay, or I'm sorry, with the city over it. And so I'm going to do this zoomed in. So here's Colorado Lagoon, right? And so Colorado Lagoon is this separated area that it's hard to know how it related to the former landscape, but here's how it related. You know, the wishbone shape of the current Colorado Lagoon was just one little arm of this vast open water bay, but then the over this way is, you know, well, here's Belmont Shore, Bouton Wetlands, Naples, Bouton Wetlands, Marine Stadium, the same, all of the, you know, the communities that were built in the 80s and 90s around Marine Stadium. But there's one remnant of all of this. And so I'll leave you with this little fun thing. The Cerritos Wetlands, you know, behind the oil field, behind the In and Out at 2nd and PCH, is the remnant of this once vast Alamedas Bay and associated wetlands. But this thing that I'm about to pass over, well, it's called Steam Shovel Slough, and it is the one remaining natural sort of mudflat tidal estuary functioning thing. And it shows up. See how it meanders up and down, or undulates up and down? That same pattern is in this 1896 map. Do you follow that? Do you see how that shape is still there? So, you know, it's hard to get out there and see this, you know, and it's, you know, I think the Friends of Los Cerritos Wetlands, you know, they do occasional tours out there. So it is possible to get out there sometimes, and it's not letting me zoom. Well, anyway, that is another, you know, remnant of this original landscape that can be, has been preserved, but it can be expanded and enhanced. And then the Colorado Lagoon project actually is going to be expanded by cutting a channel back through Marina Vista Park to connect Marine Stadium and have an open channel. So Colorado Lagoon won't be isolated. It'll be a more connected arm to our modernized Alamedas Bay. Let me get this chat back over here. Grew up in Wrigley near Magnolia and Willow, noted that the ground in the neighborhood is very sandy. Yes, that would be due to the residual sand from the shifting rivers. That's exactly right. So can try to pan back over to Wrigley, and you can see, you said in the vicinity of Magnolia and Willow. So this is Willow. And Magnolia is somewhere here. And so that there's not much showing on the underneath map in that vicinity, just its proximity to the Cerritos Slough. But this space between the LA River channel on the west and the Cerritos Slough on the east, with all the black specks, which are farmhouses, that was the bottomlands of the LA River and some of the most fertile land in the city. And it was actually the first subdivision of the Rancho Los Cerritos, something called the Wilmington Colony, that predates the American colony by 2 years. And I have a outline of the Wilmington Colony. Let's see how well it's going to show up. So yeah, I think this is Magnolia right here. Yeah, this eastern boundary of the Wilmington Colony is Magnolia. And so all of these little specks of farmhouses are now seen in the context of their 40-acre farm lot properties, where this bottomland was divided up. But when they channelized the river, they must have bought up, you know, half of somebody's, well, somebody's farms to put that river right down the middle into the where it goes now. And the LA River was channelized in part for flood control, but on early maps, they refer to it as the LA River Diversion Channel. And what it was also doing is it was diverting the river from going into the recently developed Port of Long Beach, where they went through all kinds of expense to dredge channels for ships to go into and then fill the mud flats with the material that they took out. And so here's the LA River coming in and actually going out through the sandbar by Rattlesnake Island, which is what's now Terminal Island. The LA Terminal Railroad went out onto Rattlesnake Island and renamed it shortly after this to be Terminal Island. But when it was Rattlesnake Island, it was just a sandbar, protecting the wetlands from the ocean. But the LA River, again, that idea that the LA River was transporting material from the San Gabriel Mountains, this is why we have a beach, right? And a long beach at that, because the river is pouring out sand, and then the coastal current is depositing that sand on the beach all along it. So I'm gonna, just to give you an idea of the way that the port developed in the wetland, I'm gonna turn this back on. And point out how so the earliest port development occurred in these two areas, and these little guys that stick out are little basins. Look at this basin in particular, the one I'm hovering over as I peel back the map, and notice how the port, is and here's a fun fact that I learned at some point, and some of you may know this. We kind of use the terms port and harbor interchangeably. There's the Port of Long Beach, but there's Long Beach Harbor, right? Port actually refers to the land side facilities, so the terminals and where the places where the containers get stacked, and the harbor is the water feature where the ships are. So they're kind of used interchangeably, but they're actually slightly different things. So the harbor was dredged out for the ships to be able to come in, and the dredged material was piled up to make the port. And so as we go to these earliest channels, you can see this little channel here is, they picked an existing, shallow channel that was in the wetlands, and they said, we're going to put docks around this. And so they dredged it out, and it was actually the place where the Cerritos Slough came in to the estuary. But anyway, imagine all the silt that would be coming down this channel and filling in their expensive dredging operation. So, and you can still see that silt in this modern river. So see how it's brown up here, and there's stuff here. And so they actually turned the channel away from the port. So none of that silt could get in here and mess with their fancy port. But the US Army Corps of Engineers still has to come in every year. Well, not every year, every few years, a couple times a decade, and dredge out all the sand that builds up in Queensway Bay at the mouth of the LA River.
Larry,
all right,
this
I'm
is
sorry,
absolutely fascinating. No, I think we needed the 2-hour version, but we're so lucky that you have been able to share this with us tonight.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I bet there will be follow-up questions, but I know we've kept you extra here, and we just so appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for your time. And when things get better again, I'd be happy to be invited back to a program at the Rancho in the outdoors on a big screen.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I think a lot of people are going to be going to their biggest device to see this. Marie is going to tell us about rainfall at the Rancho. Speaking of water, thank you, Larry. We really appreciate that. Sorry, I can't resist that rich presentation.
Yep. Oh, thank you. All right. Good night. Carry on.
Okay. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
You should be able to, Marie.
I'm getting there. So often people are asking me, how much rain did we get with all those storms? So what I wanted to let you know is in December of 2021, we measured 7.92 inches. And the next question is, well, what do we normally get for December? So I created a short little thing for the last 5 years to show you that we have harvested more water in 2021 than in any of the previous, actually in any of the previous years that I've been measuring for December, period. I just didn't want to fill the screen. And then the next question that I often get is, well, what about for the year? So I took those same 5 years and showed you how many inches of rain we have gotten throughout that period. And to date, measuring from October 2021 until today, which sadly was nothing, we have 9.01 inches. And I'm hopeful that we will continue to get more rain throughout our rainy season, and that we will have more of this going, even the water that we do capture, that it will go into our groundwater, which, as Larry mentioned, is sadly depleted. I can't imagine that there's any questions about this, but if you do, you all know where to find me. All right, I may not actually be sitting at my desk in front of my computer, but you got about 5 acres where you can look for me underneath the camellias or at the top of the roses or wherever I might happen to be that time. But I'm always happy to share my information. I know that you've got stuff to pass on. So unless anybody has a really urgent question, I'll pass it on to Laura.
Hi, everyone. Wasn't that a very interesting presentation? So there was a question about the earthquake, and I think that must have been my sister, because I was telling her today, I've been fascinated with the oral histories, and I had asked Larry about the Lagoon, which I had read in Frank Coronado's oral history. And Frank Coronado is the nephew of Miguel Murillo, who was a cowboy in John Temple's time. He was born in 1830, and he supposedly learned to break horses on the rancho. So his nephew shared many of his stories in 1969 when he was interviewed at the rancho. And one of his stories is that there was a lagoon, which you could see when he zoomed in on his historic map, and that was very close. And Frank said that it was so cold that when he would jump in, he would get right out again. And they said, well, the people are interviewing said, was it a spring or something? And he said, no, it opened up in an earthquake. And that made me think that his uncle would have been around for the Tajon earthquake in 1857, which was 7.9 earthquake that made any earthquake that's been in our time, like the Loma Prieta, look like beans, very small. It was a huge earthquake. And I looked at the USGS site today, and they said that there were the Los Angeles riverbed opened up during the earthquake. So that sort of lends credence to possibly this lagoon was created during the Tajon earthquake. But that was not what I was supposed to be talking about, but I just...
Laura, before you leave that, you should also add that Mike Murillo was known for a great telling wonderful tall tales.
Yes, lots of ghost stories about
not factual.
flames on the hill, but
okay, just as a parenthetic.
Yeah, no, he told they were into ghost stories and stories of treasure and gold and all those things. But anyways, but I would like to share with you some exciting news about. I'll just give you very brief, because you all know about Volgistics, and because of that, I was able to almost instantaneously know how many hours all you incredible volunteers put in last year. It was over 10,000. Pretty amazing, huh? 10,446 to be exact. So kudos to you. As Allison was saying earlier, we couldn't do it without you. And in quick notes, we'll have some more details about all of those wonderful hours that you've done. So now for our monthly check-in question, all those fun maps, we started thinking about place names and the history of them. So I was wondering if anybody has stories about place names, either near or far, that that something interesting comes from, or some realization you had from the place name about history or something. And made me think about, I grew up in Bixby Knolls and walked to school down Bixby Road every day past Jotham Place, but for the first 50 years of my life, I always called it Jotham Place, as did everybody that lived in the neighborhood and around here. And when I came to the Rancho, I found out it's not Jotham Place, it is Jotham Place. So why we promote you, you can think about if you can think of any place name trivia that you think is interesting that you'd like to share with us, or anything else you'd like to share with us. Are you guys having trouble promoting some people?
Yep, but we're still working on it.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Well, I'll pick up the gauntlet. I was thinking about when not everyone knows that neither I took my husband's last name nor he took mine when we got married. So McGuire is the name I've always had, and the name he's always had is Metz. And when my son and I, who has the same last name, Metz, were driving to the Pinnacles recently, my son said, "Hey, did you know there was a town called Metz? We need to drive through it." So we drove through it, and there's not even a welcome to Metz sign. It's a crossroads. It is tiny, but we did find Metz Street or Metz Road. So I took a picture of him right below that sign. I don't know who it's named after, but it was fun to have that place name. They're always named after somebody, right?
Did you know there's a Metz Street in Long Beach too?
I did not.
There
I did know
is.
there is a Metz France, but I'm going to have to look into these things.
Yeah,
Other
I
than
did
the
that.
fire part.
Metz for years.
That's funny. Marcia, I bet you have a good place name story. Why don't you
Well,
go
I
next?
love the story about Daisy Avenue in Long Beach. I mean, pretty much I did the whole thing on all the street names and how they got them, but I could never find one for Margaret Bixby. And we found out later that the Daisy Avenue was named after her because she didn't want to have any street name with her name, but she loved Daisy, so they allowed that in Long Beach. I like that story.
Who do you want to pass to, Marcia?
Oh, okay. Now here's my trouble because I can't see today, but I'm just going to name a name. If they're not there, then pick something. Somebody can pick something. But is Joyce there with Martin? Usually they are.
Yes, they are.
Okay, then Joyce or Martin or both.
Street thing. Oh, do we know anything? Okay, we don't know any street names. Sorry.
No place name stories, huh?
No. Sorry.
How about my sis? Welcome. This is her first time coming to a virtual gathering. Thank you, Julie.
I don't have one. I have the same one you had. You stole mine.
Oh, stupid. I should have changed it when I saw you were here. Laura, I'm glad you made it on. Do you have a place name story?
I do not, but yeah, no, I'm glad I made it on too. I wish I would have heard the beginning, but it's going to be taped, right?
It's taped, yep.
Yeah, I would have liked to hear the introduction and stuff, but no, I can't think of anything. I'm not a native Long Beacher though.
Well, it doesn't have to be Long Beach. It can be somewhere else.
I do live on Daisy though, so I love the Daisy story. No, I don't have anything.
Anybody else like to share? Sorry, Alan and Barbara and Claire and Joy, we just weren't able to promote you as many times as we clicked on promote. It just wouldn't take for some reason. So, well, anything anybody wants to share any other way? All right, well, then I guess I will make announcements. There aren't any in-person happenings at the Rancho except for public hours, of course, that we're still having because we canceled story times because of the surge, but we're hoping that that will be lifted next month because we have a very exciting virtual gather or no, in-person gathering, hopefully planned for next month. It will start at 5 o'clock, a little earlier than usual, and we will, before it gets dark, have a walkthrough with the guys in charge of the water project to show us where everything is going to, the lay of the land with the water project. And that'll just be a short half hour from 5 to 5:30. And then at 5:30, we will have Stephen Dudley, the Bixby family historian, grandson of Llewellyn Bixby II, is going to be in town, and he is going to be the featured presenter at our in-person brown bag on the veranda where you bring your sack dinner, and the Rancho provides beverages and dessert. So that is something fun to look forward to, which will be the day before the groundbreaking for our Looking Back to Advance Forward water project. That after that presentation, it really makes us understand that title even more than we did before. So I think that's
Are you
all
recording
that's
Stephen Dudley for posterity, or I mean, because he is a
Yes.
living, okay.
Yes, in some way we will be recording it, either if it will be on Zoom and live or record it. Somehow we will definitely have it recorded.
Great idea.
So if nobody else has anything to add, I guess I will bid you all adieu until next time. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Two different adieus.
Adieu. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, to the hangers on, I'm going to end the meeting for everyone. So I bid you all farewell. Good
Bye-bye.
evening.